Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to introduce the DARWIN EU project and our initiative, and also the Coronation Center to you all. I need to start with this disclosure that this presentation really represents the views of the DARWIN EU Coordination Center, which is led by Erasmus Medical Center, only, and cannot be interpreted as reflecting those of the European Medicines Agency or the European Medicines Regulatory Network. I think it's very important that we make that clear. Now, the DARWIN EU initiative is a result of one of the strategical decisions made by the European Medicines Regulatory Network, that by 2025 the use of real-world evidence will have been enabled and the value will have been established across the spectrum of regulatory use cases. So a very high ambition. This is the result of the big data task force that was set up in Europe that made a whole list of recommendations, and this was actually the number one recommendation, to set up a system that would make or give access to real-world data and generate real-world evidence for regulatory purposes. So the vision of DARWIN EU is to give EMA and national competent authorities in the EU member states access to real-world evidence. And that's a very broad spectrum of questions, of course, related to diseases over time, safety and effectiveness of medicines, including vaccines, throughout the full life cycle of the medicinal product. So the goal of the DARWIN EU Coordination Center is really to respond to the large demand of questions from the regulatory authorities. And that it requires us to set up skills and methods and technology in an organization, and also organize or get an organization set up for processes and the governance of data, and make data accessible. And of course, the whole principle of FAIR is playing a very important role here. We need to make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that's what the DARWIN EU Coordination Center is supposed to deliver to the regulatory network. Now, it's been written down actually in the technical specifications of the EMA when they sent out the tender opportunity, that DARWIN EU should be a federated network of data, but also of expertise and services that support the decision making throughout the life cycle. So the data stays local, and this all, of course, sounds very familiar to this audience that we have here. We use a common data model to perform studies in a timely manner and increase consistent results. In the technical specification, it says where applicable, and I'll come back to that. On the right, you see a diagram that EMA shared when they were looking for a contractor that describes the coordination center being in the middle and data partners around that, and EMA being one of the organizations that will use the federated network to answer their regulatory questions. You also see data permit authorities. That's something that we are exploring also, if there are organizations on a national level that could provide access to data sources and they would become also part of the data network. This is something that still needs to be developed and worked out, but that is the vision of the network. It's not only databases themselves, but also maybe intermediate organizations. Now, what will DARWIN EU do? So it will provide expertise on running studies and also running these studies themselves. It will maintain a catalog of data owners that can be used within that's the network itself. And then, of course, maintain that network of federated network of data partners. We'll run studies for the network, but also deliver training and governance and support of all the services. It's a very important part. And finally, there is a link to what's called the European Health Data Space. That's something that's set up in Europe to make data accessible across different countries. And the DARWIN EU initiative is seen as a kind of pathfinder project within the European Health Data Space. And so we have to link up to the activities that are ongoing in that much larger initiative on the European level. Now, what analysis and studies will DARWIN EU deliver? The EMA has set out three different levels of complexity in their technical specification. One is related to routine repeated analysis. Those should be studies that are repeated over time. You can think about the incidence of a series of adverse events that are repeated on a quarterly basis, for example. And then they defined off-the-shelf studies, which are studies that have a predefined input and output, like, for example, prevalence and incidence or characterization of exposure. So also describing population characteristics of a certain cohort would fall under that definition of off-the-shelf studies. Then they also defined more complex studies, for example, thinking about comparative effectiveness studies, and very complex studies were defined here as a combination of diagnosis and laboratory investigations. I think it's more about having more custom developed code to execute against the data. And the earlier ones are definitely more standardized well, I would think. Now, if you look at the project itself, it's divided over 5 phases. The first 2 phases are the establishment of the coronation center, and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year are more the operational phase. So that means that in the first 2 years, there's a large amount of work done on the development of all the processes, tools, and methods, and those will become more operational over time. And that's also reflected, so first of all, in the budget that's made available for Darwin, which is a total of 52 million euro, but it's divided in 5 different steps, starting with 4, 8, 8, 16, 16. And that budget is for setting up and operating the coronation center, but it's also for executing the studies in the data network. So that means that some of this funding will have to go also to data partners, of course, for executing the studies. The number of studies will increase very rapidly in Darwin, starting with a few studies in year 1, 4 studies, 1 repeated, 2 off the shelves, and 1 complex. But it will go up fast, especially in the 3rd year, where there's already 30, 30, 12, and it will go up even further in the operational years, where there's a very large number of studies that have to be executed across the data network. And now that requires a lot of preparation to make that happen, both technically, but especially also on standardization of analytics, standardization of data. So this is a big challenge, but I think possible with the approaches that we have proposed. Also, the number of data partners in the network will grow over time. So the idea was to start with approximately 10 data sources and grow up to 40 data sources that are available in the data, the Darwin EU data network. But it can grow further than that, of course, as well. But it's good that there is a kind of growth path, and we are not onboarding all data sources at the start, and can onboard databases that are already on a common data model or need to be mapped. Now, what would be the process in Darwin EU to conduct studies? There will be a request coming from EMA. They will define the research questions, and we will start evaluating the feasibility of that study together with the coordination center. And then the coordination center will take over the request and will go through all the different steps of study execution, starting with the protocol, ideally, of course, already based on templates, set up the code base, contact the data partners, and manage the study governance, meaning getting access or getting approval from the data boards to execute the study. Then the study will be shared with the data partners in a federated approach. They will send the aggregated results back to the coordination center, which will receive and maybe create some aggregated reports out of that, and shares that with the committee that will, in a cycle, interact with the coordination center, and that would result in the EU regulatory decision making, or will be integrated in the regulatory decision making process. So a very familiar process, of course, for most of the people in the call here. It's the way that we've been executing our studies in OHDSI. Now, what data sources will DARWIN EU use? The list you see on the screen describes, well, the expected items, I would say, a broad coverage, geographic coverage, of course, data that links both medicines with outcomes, and of course that clinical events are coded and there's accurate dates. I think not very difficult things and things you will not all expect here on this list. There are still ongoing discussions though, whether we should add additional criteria, but I think we're converging to a very good list now that would allow us to start contacting data partners and opening up for data. Now, setting up the coronation center itself is something I briefly want to talk about, starting actually with the day one for me at Erasmus, which was that there was the tender from the EMA published on the e-tendering website. And of course, me and others became very enthusiastic because we thought that this is a big opportunity to leverage all the work that we have been doing, and also the OHDSI community has been doing in the last many years. And we became extremely enthusiastic to put a huge effort in writing I think a very good proposal, building on the work of many. So we took this on, and it was a process that started in June 2021, but took to February to go in multiple rounds of evaluation. And of course, there was a lot of interest from many organizations to start to set up the coordination center. And I think this was a very interesting process, and it was tough, but I thought we were, of course, very happy that in the end we were selected from Erasmus with our subcontractors to deliver the DARWIN EU Coordination Center. So the final result was actually that we were handed over a contract to sign, and this was, of course, a very interesting moment for us because that was the moment we're going to kick off the work. So that was actually day one. Now, the problem was that it was a very large contract with almost 800 pages that we have to sign, and that couldn't be done digitally. Yeah, so it's 2022, and you would expect that would be possible, but it wasn't. And therefore, we had to do this crazy exercise here of signing each individual page of the contract, and it was even containing the OHDSI folder, because that was one of the annexes, and I had to sign every page where there was information about OHDSI on. So it was an exciting day. It took a lot of time also because you can see that it became later and later and darker. But in the end, we got it, and I'd like to thank Johan, who I think is also on the call. I thought I saw him for helping out with this. It was a memorable day, I would say. I would never forget that. And then actually we had to send this back to EMA, and they asked us, could you just scan it and put it in a PDF? And I can tell you that even that is not an easy exercise to make a PDF of 800 pages. You cannot do that with a printer like this or a scanner. So you then have to combine all these individual files into one big file. That was also another nice thing to do. But of course, we know that DARWIN will definitely not be easier than it, but it will be a lot of fun. So I'm very much looking forward to setting up the coordination center with the team. I just wanted to share the video with you because I think it was a very important moment for me. Now, of course, setting up the coordination center you do not do alone, and also with Erasmus, although we are a very large organization, we can of course work together and should work together with a couple of very good subcontractors. And although even I'm leading it together with Dani and Katja from Erasmus, and Dani also from Oxford. There are many more people involved, of course, in setting up the coordination center. So I was very pleased to work together with the subcontractors of University of Oxford, but also Synapse for around the management, Acuvia, the Hive, and Odysseus. And I think as a team, we did a very good job in getting to this point of signature, but also now to start implementing the coordination center. So a big thank you to all of you who may be in the call today. Now, the proposal that we made to EMA, of course, was driven by the fact that to realize this really large number of studies, it really requires a paradigm shift to really change the speed on or the speed on delivering of these results, but also the way we do that. And it requires a paradigm shift on many different levels for the regulators. We also believe, and that's also where all our energy is coming from and enthusiasm, is that it's really needed to make that shift now. We cannot stick to the current way of running these type of studies. We need to improve that process. So that is really a long-term investment to significantly scale up the number of studies on more databases and improve public health. So even though this time period of 5 years for Darwin is now there, I think this should of course go on, and there should be a continuous path forward. We also thought well, as I mentioned, it's simply not possible to do that by scaling up traditional approaches. We have to do it differently, and I think that is of course very much aligned with the way of thinking that we have in OHDSI, meaning that we have to improve the data interoperability, we have to improve the standardized or build standardized analytics and have a very strong technical infrastructure, and of course a large data network. Now, I don't have to explain this slide to you all, but it has been very important for Darwin EU, and it will continue to be so. This is the core of the starting points of realizing such an ambitious project, is building on the standardization of the data. We need that, otherwise we cannot develop analytical tools that can be shared amongst multiple databases to answer the questions that matter, and also have the opportunity to build a large set of these analytical tools against the same data model. We can simply not do that by having a study-by-study approach of data extraction and run these studies across multiple databases, and then so many studies in parallel in the end. We need to make a very big jump. So of course, the common data model is at the core of that, and so that's where, of course, the OMO common data model is something that is of course explained in depth in our proposal, but it's extremely valuable to have that. And of course, it's also been taken up considerably in Europe. We have the activities in Europe with the OHDSI Europe chapter, but also the fact that there are so many tools available for standardization, data quality, and data analysis. We have been using it for federated studies, also studies for the European Medicines Agency in the past. And finally, the EDEN project is of course also very important for this uptake in Europe. The fact that we are standardizing now approximately 140 databases in Europe to the OMO common data model is very important to drive this. And I'm also very proud of us leading the EDEN project and of all the data partners and all the people also in the OHDSI community that have been helping out with setting up the data network. And of course, that is a source for potential data sources that could also join the Darwin EU project. It's not limited to that, but of course, it's a very good start. So the whole process of ETL will also play a role in Darwin EU, although we'll initially be reaching out to data sources that are already on the OMO common data model. There is also still the option for databases that are not yet on the CDM to get included. So there will be processes set up, of course, building on all the tools that OHDSI and also EDEN has been developing in the last years will be leveraged here. It's really a stage process where we'll start with databases on CDM and then progressively add others if necessary and requested by the email. Standardizing the analytics is, as I mentioned, crucial as well. So we'll be setting up a catalog of these standard analytics. And of course, that will be done building strongly on all the tools that OHDSI has been developing. But there will definitely be additional things developed within Darwin. It will be driven by the request from EMA, and we are at the moment discussing actually what those 4 studies would be in year 1, and how we can then, of course, prioritize the development of these analytics. What's really at the core is that we need to align on the outputs and the analytical methods themselves, and that's also a change that we have to go through together with the regulator to find out what is that. How do we actually define an incidence rate study? We need to come to a conclusion to start building these standardized analytics and use them over time. Agile approaches are, of course, extremely important here as well. We should not try to do a waterfall approach where we try to specify everything up front. It's something that we have to learn over time, but we need to start with a good basis that at least helps them with the initial questions. Now, building the technical infrastructure is something that is also a big burden or a big task for us, I should say. So building a collaboration space for the coronation center and the study teams. Working with an analytics platform, of course, using the efforts done in OHDSI. Study execution platform, we are discussing now whether we use Arachne or a new version of that or an updated tool. We'll use training platform, service desk, and source control repository, so we will have our own GitHub in the DARWIN EU Coronation Center. Building up a website, and there is a whole other list of tools that we need to set up within the infrastructure. Now, as I mentioned, the data partners will be contacted and onboarded, and we are at the moment discussing with EMA what the process will be, whether we'll start contacting database directly or there will also be an open call. This is still under discussion. I cannot share much detail on that at the moment. But what has been decided that we'll prioritize databases that are already converted just to have a kickstart, and then potentially map highly valued data sources that EMA will prioritize. It's important to know that EMA has to agree with each data partner that will enter the network, and will also therefore they will be highly involved in the selection process. All the data sources will go to a quality control mechanism, building on the tools that some of you in the call have built, like the data quality dashboard. But there are a couple of deliverables also in the DARWIN EU project on this topic. So we may have to extend that or add additional functionality based on the request of EMA. Now, if you look at the coronation center itself and its structure, will be set up an executive board with the director and also the deputy directors, Katja and Dani and me. And under that, there will be different pillars. An advisory board pillar that's really dealing with setting up the advisory boards, and potentially also a data source prioritization committee that we set up as we set it up in Eden. If we go for open calls for data partners, that committee will help with prioritizing the databases to be included. And of course, a general ensemble, which is containing all the different partners and subcontractors and Erasmus. Next to that are that is the development pillar that will be very active and is active at the moment, of course, for setting up and developing all the different tools, the training material, potentially some method research in the future. But that's where the main activities are at the moment. And I'll skip operations for a second and move to technology. So that's where all the technical infrastructure has been set up. So the source control repository, we have a website that's been populated, and all kind of Teams environments and all kind of supportive tools are being set up at the moment. And there's management pillar, which is dealing with all the legal and contractual components and the finance and the conflict of interest management for studies. This is a very big activity. Now, in the middle is operations, and that's where the actual studies will run, but where also the network is managed, and so where the growth of the network is made operational. So that's divided in two different components, therefore. On the left, study operations, and on the right, network operations. And study operations is divided into evidence generations and evidence synthesis activities, and of course the data partners. This is totally under development now, and we are brainstorming on how to do this and also how to scale this up. But initial thoughts are that these study teams could be they can actually handle multiple studies within the same group. So you can think about drug utilization studies could be handled by the same team. But it may also be necessary to split them up in multiple teams. Of course, using the common analytics and the phenotype library is going to be a very important component to think about also for operations and to leverage that. Then on the side of the network operations, this is all about onboarding the data sources, going through a process of quality control, where we of course have a lot of experience also due to the Eden project, where we have laid down processes to do that and all kind of steps in the process that need to be signed off. It's also about keeping the databases on board and making sure that our infrastructure is operating. So that whole setup of the node and testing of the node is part of that activity under the network operations. Now we're currently ending the third month of the DARWIN EU project, and it's going very well, and we have very good interactions with Eden. I'm very happy with that. But there's a lot of work to do, and you see here that we will, in phase one, of course, have to initiate now the pilot studies and have to come to conclusions what those actually are. But in parallel, we're working on many different things. And one interesting thing, I think, is the data protection impact assessment. So we're working with the privacy knowledge officers at EMA and at Erasmus and others to think about how to do the PIA. It's a very important thing to do, of course, because of the GDPR that's effective in Europe. But we also need to think about how to recruit and onboard the data partners, and that's a process that we are in now. And then it will grow, and in phase two there will be more studies and will be more involvement with committees, and of course a scale up then has to happen after that. So immediate next steps for us at the moment are the formation of the coronation center, setting up the different teams, setting up the project management, and we are currently very heavily working on and finalizing the project plan, all kind of risk management tooling and reporting. I can tell you that's a huge amount of paperwork also, but it's also very useful to get everybody lined up. And then we need to strengthen the coronation center, building all kind of processes, setting up scientific panels, thinking about the change management plan on how to support EMA with that, and strategic oversight, and then onboarding the data sources. So that means thinking about what would be the requirements, how can we set up data use agreements with the data partners, building on efforts that we've done in the past. And then, of course, the studies themselves will require templates, feasibility forms, study outline, protocol templates, and agreements, legal agreements with the study participants, the data partners, is also an important, a very important point. If you want more information, and of course there will be a lot of things happening in DARWIN EU over time, there are multiple channels. One is the Coronation Center setting up a website that will inform the public, but there's also a newsletter from the EMA that you can sign up for, where there will be regular updates on the DARWIN EU Initiative. I want to stop there, but not without closing my presentation with a short reference to the European Odyssey Symposium. So I want to make everybody aware that the call for participation for abstract is closing this week, and we really hope that you will submit your abstracts and join us at the SHIP this is also a very good opportunity to talk to us about the DARWIN EU initiative. We will give a presentation also about this at the ship, and we really look forward to meet you all there as well. So thank you very much, and I think this is a good timing for a couple of questions.
Thank you so much, Peter. This was excellent. If we do have 15 minutes, so good time here for Q&A. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hands, and we'll just go from there. So Patrick, you want to go first?
Thank you, Peter, for giving this great presentation and for, of course, all your leadership to get us to this point. I guess my very pointed question for you is what you're trying to achieve in Darwin is to try to improve the health of the lives of patients by figuring out how to enable a community to collaboratively generate evidence that improves healthcare, which is directly aligned to the whole of our mission of OHDSI. So what you are trying to do within Europe is really a tremendous demonstration project of what we all should be aspiring to do across all of OHDSI. So I guess my pointed question is, how can we help you be successful? What can each of us on this call do to make Darwin be the success that we need it all to be?
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. And I fully agree. So this is also driven by the journey that OHDSI has been on, and I'm extremely proud that we can now apply that journey in Europe. So helping out is, of course, can be on multiple levels, and one of the things is thinking about the analytics. So we are, of course, going to leverage tools within the OHDSI community. The HADIS work, Martijn's awesome work. So we have to find ways to collaborate in that, and have the R team that we'll set up within the Coronation Center very closely collaborate with the HADIS team, for example. We should try to avoid that we're building parallel tracks. It may sometimes be needed for reasons, but I don't want to go in that direction. So that's something where being involved in a HADIS team, for example, more, and having interactions and regular meetings would be very, very useful, I would say. And beside that, the activities of exposing people to almost CDM through Eden and OHDSI is still something that's very important, because we can attract more databases through that, and the channels of OHDSI and the channels of Eden are going to be important for that as well, I would say. So yeah, help is definitely welcome. Of course, we need to streamline that in some way, but we can talk about that.
Okay. Again, please raise your hand if you have questions. I know there's a couple from the chat, so let me start with one of those from Anna. Would extending the CDM for the original data collection help speed up the process of generation of valid real-world evidence?
So could you clarify that a little bit, Anna, what you mean with extending the CDM? Why would we need to extend the CDM?
Anna, you're still your audio is not coming back. Let's go to Thamir's question. If you can come back on, we'll go back. So Thamir asks, will it be limited for a specific type of regulatory research questions, or is it open?
No, so it's open to any regulatory question that EMA has that can be answered using the real-world data. So there's no limit there. But of course, the prioritization of those questions is something that is currently under discussion. But I wouldn't limit us. I would say we go for all questions that they ask, for sure.
Any more questions? Evan, do you see a role for non-EU data partners in the generation of evidence?
Yeah, there's no clear decision on that yet, I think, but I would not be surprised if we would also open up for non-EU data at some point, large databases. But there's no decision on that, so I cannot really share that. But yeah, potentially.
Good to hear.
All right.
There's another question, if it's limited to EMA, or will other organizations will use Darwin in the future? Yeah, so it will not only be EMA, so there is a list of organizations that EMA foresees would be using Darwin in the future. It will start with EMA, but also the HTA bodies and the national competent authorities should be able to ask questions to the Darwin EU data network or to the coronation center. It's not foreseen that, for example, pharma would use Darwin EU in this setting, but regulatory organizations in the future would be. That still needs to be developed, though, and that process for that. So,
Andrew?
Andrew.
So it's just so exciting to hear all about this. The number of studies that's going to happen is extremely exciting, and I wonder if one of the ways in which the community can help. Well, I guess I'll just ask this question: is there going to be any evaluation about the trustworthiness, reliability, generalizability, some of the attributes of the studies, in addition to getting them done, kind of how well they're being done and standards for evaluating that? Is that part of the scope of Darwin to do that? And is there any way in which people working on methods or other aspects of executing these studies could facilitate the development of that?
Yeah, of course, that's something that EMA would like us to do. Although there is also another tender currently running from EMA that's focusing on quality. So we actually have to onboard some of the outcomes of that tender also in the Darwin EU project. There is room for methods research, although probably limited considering the amount of work that needs to be done. But yeah, so I would really suggest that if there are questions in Darwin that will require research, this is opened up to the community for people to help out with. I mean, that would be definitely good use of resources. Another answer to Patrick's question, I'd say.
We have a couple comments in the chat. I don't know if you, Hannah further commented, and then Joseph, I don't know if you want to just kind of comment on either of those.
Well,
We can still
maybe Anna should try first again. She was muted all the time. I would like to know what she meant. She's still muted.
Oh.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that we need to be able to trace back to the data facts. And when we are focusing on making data, transforming to the OMOP standard, that is such a big improvement, the mapping generates errors that we are dismissing at this point. But if we would start collecting, moving the data standards to collect the data, the original data facts, then we have traceability to the original data facts. And this is critically important. It was important to the Apollo 13, mission, and it's important to be able to send a spaceship to an asteroid. It's like to be able to actually collect data facts. This will need to extend. We will need to extend the OMOP language, but I think that this will facilitate tremendously better analytics. And Patrick is smiling.
No, but I agree with you that of course quality starts also with the ETL. So it's not only after the CDM that we look at quality. So that's definitely a good, well taken point. And I'm very happy that the common data model by design also stores all the source codes in the system, which is people sometimes forget that, but it's still there. So you can go back to that. And the processes that we have been setting up also with Eden and trying to make that ETL process transparent and of high quality and build tools to facilitate that is an activity that will not stop. That this will continue to be one of our main activities, I would say.
All right, Joseph,
Peter, if I could add one of the things that you've taught me that I think is actually quite helpful to Anna's point here is that in Europe, you guys tend to be much closer to the data. You tend to not be working with third parties who are middlemen of data aggregators, but rather you tend to work directly with the source of data capture. And I think that that's an exciting opportunity for those of us outside of Europe to learn from, given that you are closer to the data and closer to the source, is that going to improve the integrity of the evidence that you generate? So I'm really excited to see that play forward.
And I must say, in Europe, we have a very big problem with many different coding systems. So the use of the CDM is really going to facilitate a lot of work here. Thank you.
Joseph, you had unmuted yourself, so why don't you go, and then we'll go with Sammy and Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Joseph from Berlin in Germany, working in the Medical Informatics Initiative. Peter Rijnbeek and George Rijnbeek know a little bit about it, and we have a collaboration on rare diseases. Peter Rijnbeek was ready to work with us on Screen for Care. And the collaboration on rare diseases is just the German part of it, maybe a little bigger. But coding system was a word which Peter Rijnbeek said. And for rare diseases, especially the German ICD-10 is not enough. The ICD-10 Germany does not have codes for morbus Fabry, and a lot of them which are in the ICD-10 CM included. So, and we in Germany and in France and Italy, we are very much working on offer coding. I hope to see Martin Sedelmeier or Michelle Soch or Ines Reinecke in this meeting, but they're all not there. So I have to ask from my side, they are working on including the HPO, the human phenotype ontology. They're working on including offer coding. And I don't know very much about it. They are the specialists. I'm just a small coordinator on this. But maybe you can tell whether offer coding or something that is included already, or only Michelle Soch is working on it, or how can we get our offer coding, which will come by law in Germany, into the coding systems for, in total. And yeah, that's all. Yeah. For reimbursement, I missed the word. It's for reimbursement now, the offer coding in Germany from January the 1st next year. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can fully answer that question. It's something for the vocabulary team to pick up. I'm sure, Michael, I see you're actually there. Maybe you can, and you're even in Germany, so maybe you can answer that question.
Yeah, so no, we haven't
Michael,
planned it.
I didn't see you. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Mike. So we haven't planned it yet. However, HPO, we might get through SNOMED because they're currently discussing incorporating HPO into the SNOMED CT, and then we have it. And the OrphanNet, well, interested in collaboration. Maybe this is something that can happen inside the DARWIN EU project.
We see you after this, Michael, I think.
Yep.
The next meeting. Thank you.
Sammy. I can barely hear you. Try your question.
Okay. So Peter, thank you very much for this presentation. Congratulations. Now do you hear me? Yes, I see him smile, so that means he can hear me. Congratulations on this outstanding exploit of getting all of this European data together and working with EMA on this. I just wanted to follow up on the comment about international collaboration. In the past few years, EMA has collaborated with Health Canada on some queries so that data from Europe and data from CNODES, Canadian data from the CNODES network, were used to collaborate on queries. Similarly as well with FDA, I believe. I know we have in Canada collaborated with the FDA, and I believe EMA has also done some collaboration. So I believe that I'm answering your question. I think there will be international collaboration. It will just simply continue and it will just improve if you want to make any comments on that. But congratulations again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, of course, those collaborations will definitely happen. The question is, of course, will we be running OMOP CDM databases as part of the network? And I don't know that answer yet, but that will be collaboration between these networks for sure. Yeah, so I'm very happy to also start interacting with them and learn from each other. This is something we, in that sense, do together on a global level.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much, Sami.
Okay, we've hit the top of the hour now, and I'm sure there's more questions, but thank you certainly to Peter for both this presentation and your leadership, and to everybody in the community who has helped put the foundation in place for this to happen. Certainly, this is a global effort, and it's very exciting to have Erasmus leading the Coordination Center for Darwin EU. This full presentation, as well as Peter's slides, will be available on the community calls page later on, as well as all the job openings and all the other updates from the beginning of this call. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you again, Peter. Please do join us next week for our Mother's Day themed breakout discussions, and everybody have a great day and a great week. Bye.
Thank you.